On August 6, 2025, President Donald Trump stunned the world by announcing a dramatic escalation in the ongoing US-India trade dispute, a sweeping 50% tariff on a wide range of Indian goods entering the United States. This bold move, delivered from the White House, signaled a new phase in the already tense relationship between the two economic giants. The announcement immediately sent shockwaves through global markets and left policymakers scrambling to assess the potential fallout. The first 25% tariff was imposed without delay, instantly raising costs for Indian exporters and American importers alike. Another 25% is set to take effect on August 27, creating a tense 3-week window for last-ditch diplomatic efforts. During this period, negotiators from both sides are expected to work around the clock, hoping to find common ground before the full weight of the tariffs is felt. This move effectively doubles the existing tariffs, creating what many experts are calling an almost insurmountable barrier for Indian exporters. For many businesses, the sudden spike in costs could mean layoffs, factory closures, and lost contracts. It also marks a sharp and unexpected break from decades of growing economic cooperation and mutual benefit between the US and India, threatening to undo years of progress. Trump's aggressive trade stance now targets countries representing a staggering 60% of global economic output, not just India. With these new tariffs, US trade barriers have reached levels not seen since the protectionist era of the 1930s, raising fears of a broader global slowdown and a return to economic nationalism. At the heart of the dispute is the US demand for greater access to India's vast market for American agricultural products. However, negotiations have repeatedly stalled, with both sides refusing to budge. President Trump has publicly called India's trade barriers obnoxious, further inflaming tensions and making compromise seem increasingly unlikely. The announcement sent immediate shockwaves through financial markets and diplomatic circles. Investors reacted with alarm, and business leaders on both sides of the Pacific voiced concern that years of partnership and trust could quickly unravel, putting thousands of jobs and billions in trade at risk. As the world watches, the coming weeks will reveal whether this is simply a high-stakes negotiating tactic or the beginning of a damaging trade war, one that could reshape not only US-India relations, but the entire landscape of global alliances and economic cooperation for years to come. The White House has defended its decision to impose tariffs on Indian goods, framing them as a direct response to India's growing economic partnership with Russia. US officials argue that these measures are not just about trade, but about sending a strong message regarding global alliances and the consequences of defying Western sanctions. At the heart of the dispute are India's rapidly increasing imports of Russian oil and gas, which have surged since the start of the Ukraine conflict. These energy deals have allowed India to secure fuel at discounted rates, providing a crucial lifeline for its economy. Washington contends that by purchasing so much Russian energy, India is effectively weakening the impact of Western sanctions on Moscow. In 2024 alone, India's Russian oil imports soared to a staggering $52 billion, raising concerns in Washington about the effectiveness of its pressure campaign. The Trump administration, and now its successors, have made it clear: allies who want access to the vast US market must align with American strategic interests, not those of its rivals. This stance has hardened as global tensions have risen. For India, however, the calculus is different. Officials insist that their energy choices are driven by economic necessity, not geopolitics. With a population of 1.4 billion, affordable Russian oil is seen as essential to keep the country running and to support millions of families. New Delhi maintains that access to cheap energy is critical for economic stability and for keeping inflation in check, especially as global prices fluctuate and domestic needs grow. Ultimately, the US is focused on isolating Russia and maintaining its own influence, while India is determined to prioritize its economic growth and the well-being of its citizens. This deep-rooted difference in priorities has led to a diplomatic standoff, with both sides unwilling to compromise on their core interests. Trade negotiations have stalled and trust has eroded. Now, billions of dollars in trade and the future of US-India relations hang in the balance as the world watches to see whether New Delhi will yield to American pressure or chart its own independent course. India's response has been firm defiance, with Prime Minister Modi declaring he won't compromise the interests of farmers and the vulnerable. The government calls the US tariffs extremely unfortunate, emphasizing its duty to ensure energy security for 1.4 billion citizens. India insists its trade policies serve national interests, not foreign agendas. Modi's government cannot afford to appear weak, especially on issues framed as defending ordinary citizens. National pride and strategic autonomy drive India's refusal to bow to US demands. While back-channel talks aren't ruled out, India has set a high bar for compromise. Any resolution must respect India's sovereign right to make its own choices. By refusing to back down, India signals the costs of this trade war will be felt on both sides. The 50% tariff threatens to derail key Indian export sectors, impacting 55% of exports to the US, worth $87 billion in 2024. Major industries hit include textiles, footwear, gems and jewelry, pharmaceuticals, and engineering goods. Labor-intensive sectors like textiles face a 30 to 35% price disadvantage versus competitors like Vietnam and Bangladesh. This could trigger factory closures, job losses, and a long-term loss of US market share. High-value sectors like gems and pharmaceuticals will also suffer, disrupting global supply chains and affordable medicine flows. Economists warn the tariffs could freeze billions in trade and push India's GDP growth below 6%. The tariffs act as a massive tax on Indian productivity, with ripple effects across the economy. The blow threatens India's growth ambitions and millions of livelihoods. The tariffs mark a new low in US-India relations, replacing strategic partnership with economic confrontation. India quickly pivoted diplomatically, sending its national security advisor to Moscow to reaffirm ties with Russia. Rather than backing down, India is doubling down on its Russia relationship. Modi is also preparing for a rare visit to China, hinting at a possible new Asian axis opposed to US protectionism. An India-China rapprochement could reshape Asia's geopolitical landscape, challenging US influence. By targeting both India and China, the US may be pushing its rivals closer together. India's outreach to Russia and China is a classic hedging strategy, reducing dependence on an unpredictable US. The US tariffs on India follow a tight timeline: 25% on August 7th, another 25% on August 27th. The 21-day window is a frantic period for last-ditch negotiations to avoid the full 50% rate. The fate of billions in trade depends on these talks. Meanwhile, a fragile US-China tariff truce expires August 12th, adding to global uncertainty. The Trump administration is applying maximum pressure on multiple fronts, risking a worldwide backlash. The rapid succession of deadlines has created chaos for businesses. Orders canceled, investments delayed, supply chains scrambled. Planning is nearly impossible as the crisis unfolds in real time. Each day brings the world closer to a new era of protectionism and economic conflict. The new tariffs aimed at India are not just a distant diplomatic maneuver. They will have a direct and significant impact on the US economy as well. While the intention may be to protect American industries, the reality is that these tariffs will ripple through every layer of the US market, affecting both businesses and everyday consumers. Major US companies are already sounding the alarm about rising costs. Retailers, consumer goods giants, and automakers now face a difficult decision. Should they absorb these higher expenses and risk shrinking profits, or pass them on to consumers in the form of steeper prices? For many, there may be no choice but to raise prices, especially as supply chains become more expensive and less predictable. Everyday items like clothing, shoes, and household goods could see price hikes of over 30%. This will hit lower and middle-income Americans the hardest, as they spend a larger share of their income on these essentials. Families may find themselves forced to cut back on necessities or delay important purchases, straining household budgets even further. In effect, these tariffs act as a regressive tax, shrinking the purchasing power of millions and raising the overall cost of living. The burden will not be shared equally. Those with the least will feel it the most. Economists warn that the broader impact could be even more severe. US GDP growth is projected to drop by as much as 0.5 percentage points in both 2025 and 2026, slowing the nation's economic momentum and potentially leading to job losses in vulnerable sectors. While tariff collections have surged, bringing in more revenue for the government, this short-term gain is overshadowed by the long-term risks to economic stability and growth. Some U.S. industries may see a temporary boost, but most will suffer from disrupted supply chains, higher input costs, and lost export opportunities. The uncertainty could force businesses to delay investments or even shut down operations. India, in response, may retaliate with its own tariffs or restrictions, closing off a major and growing market for U.S. goods and services. This could further escalate tensions and deepen the economic pain. Ultimately, the pain of this trade war will be felt on both sides of the Pacific, as businesses, workers, and families in both countries grapple with the consequences of rising barriers and shrinking opportunities. As the 21-day window closes, the world waits. Will there be negotiation, retaliation, or stalemate? The best hope is a compromise. India phasing down Russian oil imports, the US easing tariffs. But Trump's team may demand total capitulation, risking failed talks. If diplomacy fails, India could retaliate with tariffs on US agriculture and industry, escalating the conflict. India is also preparing relief for its exporters to weather the storm. A prolonged stalemate would freeze trade, hurt both economies, and undo decades of progress. The outcome will shape the future of US-India ties and Asia's balance of power. The next few weeks will decide if these democracies can find common ground or spiral into deeper conflict.